August 21st, 1831. Before sunrise, a quiet Virginia county believed it was safe. Doors unlocked, windows open. The people in power slept easily. They did not know that, in the dark, men they considered invisible were already moving with purpose, following plans, made in whispers, in memory, in silence. By the end of the day, fear would spread farther than the violence itself, and soon lawmakers would rush to tighten chains, close books, and shrink freedoms, trying to make sure this kind of night could never happen again. Not because the system was weak, but because, for a few hours, it realized it wasn't in control. Welcome to the channel. Share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe if you want more stories about the hidden forces that shaped history. August 21st, 1831. The date will come later. For now, there is only the hour before dawn, when the world belongs to things that do not need permission to move. Mist rests low over the fields. Not dramatic, not symbolic, just present. The kind that softens fences and blurs distances, that makes a house look closer than it is and a road harder to follow. Crickets are finishing their shift. Roosters have not yet begun theirs. Between those two sounds lives a narrow stretch of time, where nothing is announced. This is where the story hides. The land is arranged in long Bayesian lines, crops in rows, trees pushed to the margins, paths worn into the soil by repetition, not choice. The houses sit where the land rises slightly, safe from flooding, built to face the breeze. Behind them, farther than comfort, but closer than honesty, are smaller structures. Built without breeze in mind, everything has its place. That is the point. By daylight, the arrangement will feel natural, orderly, even peaceful, if viewed from a distance. But in the dark, the distances collapse. Sound travels differently. A footstep in one yard belongs to every yard. A door opening anywhere feels like it is opening everywhere. Inside the largest house on the rise, a clock ticks with unnecessary confidence. It measures a future it assumes will arrive unchanged. On a nearby table, papers rest in neat stacks, records of ownership, tallies, debts, births reduced to inventory, punishments reduced to notes. Ink has done what rope and wood began. It has made control look permanent. No one in the house is awake. They sleep under the protection of law, routine, and belief. Belief that the night is empty. Belief that those who work their land are too watched, too divided, too tired to imagine otherwise. Belief is the quietest guard dog dot further down the slope. In a structure that does not have a clock, a man is awake. Not suddenly. He has been awake for a long time, lying still, listening to the breathing around him, measuring the night not in hours but in layers of sound, wind, insects, someone turning in sleep, far off, an animal shifting in its pen. He is not thinking about courage. He is thinking about timing. His life has trained him to notice what others ignore. Which boards complain when stepped on. Which doors swell in humidity. Which dogs bark at strangers, and which bark at everything. He knows the difference between a footstep that belongs and one that doesn't. He knows how long it takes for a lantern to be lit by shaking hands. He has learned these things the way water learns. The shape of a riverbank by being forced against it, again and again, until the shape becomes memory. He does not sit up yet. Around him, others sleep in postures that speak of exhaustion rather than rest. Hands still curled as if holding tools. Muscles that do not fully release, even in dreams. Their days are measured in commands, their nights in recovery. Tomorrow has always looked like yesterday with minor adjustments in weather. Tonight is an adjustment in something else. The man turns his head slightly toward the door. There is no signal yet, no whisper, no knock. Nothing that would register to an ear not trained to wait for almost nothing. This is how erasure works. Not only by force, but by shrinking the space in which a person can be seen. By turning lives into background. By making entire groups of people part of the setting, like fences or trees, present, useful, when something is treated as scenery long enough, its movement feels unnatural, threatening, impossible. But scenery watches all day, every day. It watches who leaves first in the morning, who carries keys, who forgets to latch a gate, who drinks more than usual, who argues, who trusts, who doesn't. Information travels along routes, no map records. Passed in glances, in pauses, in songs sung slowly enough to hide extra meaning between lines. A system built on surveillance forgets that. Observation goes both ways. The clock in the big house continues its quiet counting. Somewhere beyond the fields, a creek moves over stone with steady indifference. It has seen the land under different arrangements of power. Forest before fence, path before road. It will see other arrangements still. Water keeps its own archives. A board settles with a soft, dry sound. The man on the floor opens his eyes fully now. He does not move right away. He listens for reaction. None comes. Breathing continues. Someone sighs. The night accepts the noise as its own. He sits up. The motion is practiced slow enough to avoid drawing attention, quick enough to matter. His feet find the floor in places he knows will not speak. He does not look back at the others. Not because he doesn't care, because looking would slow him. And slowness now belongs to a different kind of future. Outside, the air carries the damp weight of late summer. It presses fabric against skin. It carries smells farther than daylight does soil. Animals, wood, distant water, and something else. Anticipation has a scent, though no one ever names it. It lives in the back of the throat. Metallic and thin. Across the property, though property is not the word the night would use, another door opens. Just enough to release a shape into the dark, then another, then another. Not all at once, not in formation. That would be visible. This is a different kind of movement. Staggered, casual. If anyone were watching, no one is. The people who might notice are asleep under the protection of assumptions. The people who are awake have learned to move without attracting narrative. Their lives have depended on it. A path through the trees begins to collect figures. They do not greet each other. Speech would be wasteful. Recognition happens in the angle of a shoulder, the pace of a step. They gather the way fog gathers gradually, quietly, until absence becomes present. No leader announces himself. Authority here is not worn. It is understood. It comes from memory. Who remembers what? Who has seen the most? Who has survived the longest without bending in ways that show? The man from the floor takes his place among them without introduction. Is not the tallest, not the oldest, not the loudest. Those are not useful qualities tonight. What binds them is not a speech or a banner. It is accumulation. Years of watched injustice stacked carefully inside the body. Layer upon layer, until silence itself becomes a form of pressure. Pressure seeks release. Not loudly, inevitably, they begin to move. Through trees that have heard everything and repeated nothing. Past fences that were built to contain bodies, not intentions. Toward houses that were designed with the front door in mind, never the back. Inside one of those houses, a child turns in sleep. A parent, half waking, listens for trouble and hears only night. The mind, trained by routine, chooses the explanation that allows rest to continue. This is the final kindness. The system receives the belief that morning will resemble yesterday. The group pauses at the edge of a yard. The house ahead is quiet, its windows dark. A dog lies under the porch, head on paws, loyal to the hand that feeds it. It lifts its head, sensing shapes where there should be none. One of the figures steps forward slowly, whispering a sound that dog knows from daylight. The animal's tail gives a cautious thump. Confusion wins over alarm. The dog lowers its head again. Observation repurposed. Nothing here looks like rebellion yet. No fire, no shouting, just people standing where they are not expected to stand, at an hour not assigned to them. With intentions no ledger has recorded, history will later search for the moment it began. It will want a single spark, a single decision, a single name, to attach to the shift from endurance to action. But beginnings like this do not have edge. They are long, slow curves. By the time anyone notices, the turn has already been made. The man from the floor looks at the house. He does not see architecture. He sees routines. Who wakes first? Where the tools are kept? Which doors stick? He has carried this map in his head for years, built from fragments, corrections, consequences, erasure. Tried to make him small. Hair trained him, instead. Behind him, the others wait without fidgeting. Stillness is a skill they have practiced daily. Under supervision, now they use it without permission. A breeze moves through the trees, just enough to stir leaves into a soft, continuous sound. It covers smaller noises. The night, unintentionally, assists. The man steps forward. Not dramatically. Not with visible anger. With the focus of someone performing a task that has been delayed too long around the county. Other houses rest in similar confidence. Other clocks tick. Other papers lie stacked in the faith that ink can hold a future still. None of them yet understand that the most dangerous thing in their world has never been forced. It has been memory. Memory of families separated. Of promises made and broken before the sentence ended. Of laws spoken in one room and enforced in another. Memory stored in bodies that were counted but never heard. Memory does not sleep. As the first door begins to open in a way it was never meant to, the balance of the landscape shifts, not visibly, not yet, but fundamentally. The arrangement of power that felt as solid as the earth is revealed to be dependent on something fragile. Agreement. An agreement, once withdrawn, makes even the strongest structure feel temporary. The clock in the big house continues to tick, unaware that it is now measuring something else, not the continuation of a system, but the final hours before it realizes it is afraid, before a system becomes violent. It becomes ordinary. Morning arrives the same way it always does. Light spilling slowly across fields, touching rooftops first, then fences, then the packed earth of paths walked so often they no longer feel like ground, just expectation. Nothing in the sunrise suggests instability. Smoke begins to rise from chimneys in the larger houses. Coffee is poured, boots are pulled on. A ledger is opened at a kitchen table where yesterday's numbers wait patiently to be continued. The language of the morning is calm, practical, managerial. Outside, bells do not ring, but the day, still, has a schedule. In the smaller quarters beyond the main house, waking is not gradual. It is summoned. A door opens. A name is called. Then another. The sound is not loud, but it carries authority shaped by repetition. No one asks what day it is. The answer would change nothing. Routine is the architecture of control. Men and women step into the early light, already measuring themselves against tasks. Rows to tend, tools to carry, animals to feed. Movements learned so deeply they require no instruction. Efficiency is mistaken for acceptance. Silence is mistaken for agreement. The system depends on these misunderstandings. A young boy, not yet tall enough to lift the heavier tools, carries water instead. Back and forth. Back and forth. He watches everything. Children are expected to forget. Instead, they memorize. Which overseer counts carefully, and which one estimates? Which path leads to the creek without passing open windows? Which days bring visitors, and which days bring punishments? He does not know he is studying power. He only knows that noticing reduces surprise, and surprise is dangerous. In the main house, breakfast conversation circles familiar topics: weather, yield, prices in distant markets. Voices carry mild frustration or mild satisfaction, never doubt about the structure that makes such discussions possible. The people at the table talk about land, the way sailors talk about the sea. Demanding, unpredictable, but unquestionably theirs. They do not talk about the hands that make their plans real. Those hands are discussed later, outdoors, in terms of output and discipline. Language helps with erasure. It turns people into measures. Strong, weak, reliable, trouble. A woman in the yard hangs laundry with quick, practiced motions. Each clothespin placed with care, not because the work matters, but because being seen to do it well matters. Her face remains neutral, even when no one is looking. Expression is a risk. Joy can be read as insolence. Fatigue can be read as defiance. So, the safest face is one that says nothing at all. She knows which windows to avoid. Glancing toward, she knows how long she can pause to stretch her back before someone notices the pause instead of the pain. She knows that survival here is not about strength. It is about calibration. Too slow draws attention. Too fast raises expectation. In fields, rows stretch outward in straight, uncompromising lines. Plants do not choose where they grow. Neither do the people tending them. The sun climbs higher, heat settling in early, pressing down on shoulders already carrying more than weight. Conversations happen without turning heads. A comment about the soil might really be about who is watching. A question about tools might be a warning that someone is approaching. Meaning travels sideways, disguised as weather talk. The system listens for rebellion in raised voices, in gatherings, in visible defiance. It does not know how to hear cooperation, whispered through routine. An overseer rides along the edge of the field, posture relaxed in the saddle, a symbol more than a participant. He does not need to shout often. His presence is a reminder of consequence, and consequence does most of the work by itself. He believes he is maintaining order. He does not see that he is also providing information, showing when he patrols, how closely he watches, where his attention drifts. Every circuit he makes becomes part of a mental map drawn by the people he assumes are only focused on the ground. At midday, food is distributed in portions that speak clearly about hierarchy. Shade is limited. Time is measured not by hunger satisfied but by hunger postponed. Laughter, when it happens, is quick and quiet. Like something borrowed. A man sits slightly apart, chewing slowly, eyes lowered. To anyone passing, he looks tired, compliant, unremarkable. Inside, he is sorting details: which barns are locked at night, which ones are not, which households keep firearms close, and which store them carelessly. He never writes anything down. Paper can be taken. Memory cannot. Not without ending the person who carries it. So, memory becomes an act of resistance that looks exactly like patience. The afternoon stretches, muscles burn, hands blister and harden again. Orders are given and followed. The rhythm of command and response, so steady it begins to feel like a law of nature rather than a human arrangement. This is how systems protect themselves, by blending into the landscape of the possible. A girl working near the tree line hums under her breath. The melody is old, older than the fields, older than the language spoken in the big house. Songs travel where bodies cannot. They carry timing, warnings, hopes stripped of decoration. An overseer hears only sound. He does not hear instruction hidden in repetition, direction hidden in emphasis. He has been trained to detect threat in noise, not in pattern. By late afternoon, clouds gather in slow formations, promising rain that may or may not come. Weather is one of the few forces here that does not respect ownership. Everyone looks up at the same sky, but not everyone is allowed to hope for the same kind of storm. When work finally slows, the return to the quarters happens in loose groups. No one rushes. Urgency invites questions. Fatigue is believable. Fatigue is safe. But beneath the slowness is a current moving faster than footsteps. Inside the small cabins, evening routines begin. Fires lit, simple meals prepared, clothes mended in low light, children washed with careful economy of water. On the surface, nothing distinguishes this night from hundreds before it. That sameness is the disguise. A man sits by the doorway, carving a small piece of wood into a shape with no obvious purpose. His hands move automatically. His ears are tuned beyond the cabin walls. He notes which voices drift from the main house. Laughter tonight, louder than usual. Visitors, maybe, or drink. Either way, attention will be elsewhere later. Useful. The yard. Two women speak quietly while folding cloth. Their words stay on ordinary subjects, but their pauses align in a way that marks agreement already reached. Plans rarely need to be spoken twice. Repetition increases risk. A child asks a question about tomorrow and is told, gently, to sleep. Not because the question is unwelcome, because tomorrow will not resemble any explanation they could safely give. Darkness comes in layers, blue to gray to black. One by one, lights go out in the big house. Doors close, locks slide into place with the comfort of ritual. The people inside believe security is something you build outward, with walls and weapons and law. They do not consider the possibility that security also depends on the consent of those forced to maintain it. In the quarters, quiet settles differently, not empty, waiting. The man by the doorway finishes carving and slips the small object into his pocket. A signal, not a tool. something that will be recognized in low light by touch alone. He steps outside and looks up. Stars are visible between slow-moving clouds. No sign marks the sky to say, "This is a night that will be remembered." History rarely announces itself in advance. It arrives dressed like any other day and is only recognized in retrospect, when it is too late to prevent. Around him, others step out for reasons that would not invite suspicion, to relieve themselves, to check on an animal, to cool off before sleep. Movements overlap naturally. Paths cross. Brief eye contact confirms what words do not. They have all been shaped by the same pressure. Years of being watched have taught them how not to be seen. Years of being ordered have taught them how to coordinate without appearing to decide. Years of being underestimated have given them the advantage of surprise. Oppression has been a brutal teacher, but it has taught. From the main house, a final burst of laughter escapes into the night, then fades as a door closes. Silence spreads outward again, confident, unchallenged. It does not know it is being studied. A breeze moves through the trees, bending branches in a soft, continuous motion. Leaves whisper against one another, covering smaller sounds. A footstep here, a gate eased open there. The system sleeps, certain that morning will restore its shape. It does not understand that the shape has already begun to change. Not with fire, not with noise, but with a decision carried quietly in many bodies at once. A decision born from a world that left no safe place to stand still. Tonight, the routines that built the system will be used to move through it, and the invisibility that was meant to diminish them will become the one thing power never learned how to defend against. Long before anything breaks, it starts to strain. The strain is not loud. It does not announce itself with banners or arguments. It lives in small misalignments between what a system says about itself and what it requires to survive. By the late summer of that year, the land is producing well. Yields are discussed with cautious optimism. Prices in distant cities flicker up and down like signals no one here fully understands, but everyone pretends to. Newspapers arrive with folded corners and damp edges, carrying debates from places where men argue about liberty in rooms built by people who do not have it. The words travel faster than the truth. In the big house, talk of rights and governance sometimes drifts across the dinner table, spoken with seriousness, even pride. Voices lower when the subject turns to unrest in other places, revolutions overseas, uprisings whispered about in border states, rumors of plots discovered and stopped. Each story ends the same way. It couldn't happen here. Not because of kindness, not because of control. Outside those walls, the same news lands differently. Passed from hand to hand, retold from memory when paper is taken away. Stories shrink and grow at the same time, details lost, meaning sharpened. The idea that systems can be shaken lodges quietly in the mind, not as hope exactly, but as proof that permanence is often a costume. Contradiction becomes part of the air. Men who speak of freedom also tighten patrols at night. Laws are passed, restricting movement, assembly, learning not because the system is confident, but because it is afraid of what knowledge does when it connects people who have been kept separate. Fear writes legislation faster than justice ever has. On Sundays, sermons echo through wooden churches where order is described as divine. Obedience is framed as virtue. Suffering is assigned a future reward no one alive will be required to witness. The language is polished, practiced, sincere, but outside the church doors, punishment remains immediate and earthly. People learn to hear the difference between belief and convenience. The fracture widens not in dramatic acts, but in accumulated awareness. Each person carries their own ledger of imbalance, moments when rules shift depending on who is standing in front of them. Promises that dissolve under scrutiny, mercy offered as spectacle but withheld as policy. A man can be called trustworthy, and still not trusted with his own time. A woman can be praised for loyalty, and still be sold without warning. Children can be described as blessings and still be counted as assets. Language strains to hold these contradictions without tearing in. The quarters, conversations at night take on a different texture. Still quiet, still careful, but threaded now with a question no one voices directly. How long can something this unstable pretend to be solid? Information moves along familiar paths. A visitor from another county mentions stricter patrols after a rumored plot. A trader passing through mutters about new laws banning gatherings after dark. A preacher, careful with his tone, references a story from scripture about deliverance, then moves on too quickly. Signals, none decisive, alone. Together, they form a pattern. The system is tightening, and tightening is not strength. It is pressure, revealing weakness. Patrols increase along the roads at night. Riders move in pairs where one used to suffice. Questions are asked more often, though rarely answered honestly. The official explanation is vigilance. The unspoken reason is doubt. Those in power sense something shifting, but cannot see its shape. So they guard against everything, which means they understand nothing. In the fields, work continues under the same sun in the same rows. But attention is divided now. Ears track distant hoofbeats as closely as instructions. Eyes measure distance between trees, not just for shade, but for concealment. Oppression has trained observation into reflex. A man cutting wood notes that the axe handles are stored differently this season, closer to the house, less accessible. A woman delivering food sees that a back door now has an extra latch. A boy sent to fetch water realizes the path to the creek is being watched more often. Each small change is meant to close a gap. Each one also announces where fear lives. The irony settles in slowly. The system's attempts to prevent rebellion create the very conditions that make it imaginable. Restrictions bring people into closer coordination. Surveillance sharpens their awareness. Punishment clarifies stakes that were already understood. Pressure aligns in the main house. An argument breaks out one evening between two men over policy far away. WEFs, elections, speeches given in cities they've never seen. Voices rise, not about morality, but about profit and power. The words state and rights are used like shields. No. One mentions the people working by lantern light just outside. They are the foundation of the debate and its deliberate omission. Later, that night, one of the arguing men steps onto the porch to cool his temper. He looks out over land he believes he commands. The fields lie dark and still. The cabins beyond are quiet. He feels reassured by the calm, mistaking stillness for submission. He does not understand that stillness can also be coordination waiting for a signal. In another part of the county, a minor incident ripples through conversation, a confrontation on the road, a refusal, a punishment harsher than usual. The details blur with retelling, but the message lands clearly. The margin for error is shrinking. When systems feel threatened, they become less predictable. And unpredictability erodes the one thing fear depends on: routine. Routine allows endurance. Chaos invites decision. Inside a small cabin, a group sits in near darkness, speaking in tones barely above breath. Not planning in the way authorities imagine, no maps, no written lists, no dramatic vows. Planning here looks like comparison. Who has seen what? Who can move where without notice? Which households are distracted by visitors? Which nights the patrols drink more than they watch? Knowledge is pooled carefully, like water carried in cupped hands. No one asks, will this work? The better question is, what happens if we do nothing? Silence answers. Across the plantation boundary lines that only one side recognizes, similar thoughts take shape in other minds. The same contradictions press down, the same laws tighten, the same sermons promise patience while practice delivers pain. The system believes isolation prevents unity, but shared conditions create their own form of connection. One evening, thunder rolls in the distance, but never arrives. The air grows heavy, waiting for a storm that refuses to break. People look to the sky with frustration, crops thirsty, tempers short. The metaphor is too obvious to mention. Even the weather seems stalled between states. That night, a patrol rides past the quarters earlier than usual. Hoofbeats, sharp, voices alert. They shine lantern light into shadows, searching for gatherings, for signs, for something they can name and punish. They find nothing, because what is forming does not look like conspiracy. It looks like people going about their lives under increasing pressure, adapting quietly, aligning their understanding of the risk. Invisibility is doing its work. At the center of this widening fracture stands a man who has learned to speak carefully in two languages, the language expected of him and the one he keeps for truth. He listens more than he talks. When he does speak, it is often about scripture, about visions, about signs in nature. Some hear faith, others hear permission. He does not argue with the system. He does not petition it. He studies it. He notes where belief and brutality intersect. Where hypocrisy is so complete, it circles back to weakness. He understands something the system refuses to admit. Power, built on fear, must constantly prove itself. And each proof exposes its dependence. The fracture line is everywhere now, though still invisible from above. In the big house, locks multiply in the quarters. Trust does. One afternoon, a wagon arrives, carrying newspapers and supplies. The driver complains about unrest in distant places, about laws changing, about politicians stirring trouble. He says the country feels tense, like something is coming. He says it casually, unaware of how the words land. People listening from the yard absorb the tone, the uncertainty. Even those who cannot read understand that stability is being debated by men who have always claimed to embody it. If the powerful are worried, then power is not as solid as it looks. This realization does not bring comfort. It brings urgency. Because instability cuts both ways. It creates opportunity, yes, but also danger. Systems under stress react harshly, often blindly. Windows of possibility are narrow and unpredictable. Waiting forever is not safety. It is surrender to tightening control as summer leans toward its end. The rhythm of life continues on the surface: harvest preparations, repairs before cooler weather, small illnesses treated with limited means. But underneath, alignment hardens into intent. The fracture has spread too far to be ignored. Still, nothing visible has happened. That is the system's final mistake. It expects rebellion to look like noise, like banners, like men shouting in daylight. It prepares for spectacle. It does not prepare for coordination born in silence, carried in memory, timed to routine. So it keeps talking about order while living in contradiction. It keeps preaching obedience while fearing the obedient. It keeps calling people property while relying on their judgment every hour of every day. And in doing so, it builds a world where the only surprise left is that the surprise did not come sooner. Power rarely introduces itself with a raised voice. It prefers paperwork, titles, seals pressed into wax. Men who carry authority the way they carry pocket watches, polished, visible, inherited, in the county seat, miles from the fields where labor bends under the sun. A courthouse stands with straight-backed confidence. Its columns are meant to suggest permanence. Its steps are worn by boots that have never walked a row or lifted a bale. Inside, law is discussed in measured tones, as if consequence were an abstraction rather than a daily condition. Here, the system recognizes itself. Men gather in this building to talk about order. They debate patrol funding, restrictions, rumors from neighboring counties. They use phrases like public safety and stability and property protection, each word shaped to sound neutral, necessary, inevitable. Fear sits at the table with them, but no one names it. Reports have been arriving for months. Whispers of gatherings after dark, of messages passed in ways patrols cannot intercept, of a preacher whose words seem to reach deeper than they should. None of it solid enough to act on decisively. All of it enough to disturb sleep. So they do what systems do. When they sense movement they cannot see, they tighten. Curfews are enforced with less flexibility. Passers are demanded more often. Punishments for minor infractions grow harsher. Not because the infractions matter, but because severity performs control. The law does not admit uncertainty. It responds to it with volume. Back on the plantations, these changes arrive not as proclamations, but as experiences. A man stopped on the road and questioned longer than before. A woman denied permission to visit family on a nearby property. A gathering dispersed not for noise, but for existing. Each restriction carries the same message. We are watching, but the watching has a limit. It looks for movement that stands out. It does not know how to track stillness that has purpose. One evening, a patrol rider approaches a small group returning late from assigned work. He asks questions he already knows the answers to, searching for hesitation, for contradiction, for anything that might justify suspicion. He finds none. The men respond with lowered eyes and careful tones, respectful, measured, exactly as expected. He rides away uneasy, unable to say why. Control depends on predictable fear. When fear becomes disciplined, it starts to resemble calm. And calm in the wrong places unsettles those who expect visible submission. At the center of this tightening net stands a figure the system has noticed but not understood. A preacher. That is the label that makes him legible to authority. Religious, intense, perhaps prone to visions, but contained within belief, not strategy. They have questioned him before. Briefly, warned him about gatherings, about interpretation, about stepping beyond approved boundaries. He listened, nodded, spoke softly about scripture, about obedience to divine order. He left them with nothing actionable. They mistook composure for compliance. What they could not see was that his power did not come from defiance in daylight. It came from recognition at night, the ability to articulate what others already felt but could not safely say. Not in slogans, in inevitability. He did not promise rescue. He spoke of reckoning, and reckoning does not require permission. Inside, a cabin lit by a single, shielded flame, he sits with a small group. The air is thick with heat and caution. No one writes anything down. No one raises their voice. The conversation moves in fragments, in references, in shared understanding built over years. They speak of risk plainly, not glory, not victory, consequence. They name what will happen if they are caught. Punishment not just for them, but for others. Retaliation that will not bother with fairness. The system does not need proof when it wants to make an example. Everyone in the room knows this already. Saying it aloud does not discourage them. It clarifies the cost of waiting. Outside, the night sounds continue: insects, distant animals, wind in leaves, ordinary, indifferent. The world does not signal moral turning points. It offers the same background to every decision, merciful or brutal. The preacher, though no one uses his name here, does not give orders. He asks questions that only have one honest answer left. How much longer? What future is being preserved by endurance? Who benefits from patience now? Silence answers. First, then quiet agreement, not in words, but in posture. In breath that steadies rather than shakes. This is recognition, not of a hero, of a moment. Elsewhere on the plantation, a woman sits with her back against a wall, listening as two children sleep beside her. She has heard enough to understand what is coming, though no one has explained it directly. She knows the pattern of glances, the careful shifts in routine, the way certain people now move with contained focus. She also knows what reprisals look like. Her choice is not whether to join, it is whether to stop those who will. She does not because she believes in a clean outcome, but because she understands that the current path leads somewhere just as brutal, only slower. This is the kind of choice the system never accounts for. Decisions made without illusions, without promises of safety, without expectation of recognition. Decisions made because every available future contains danger, and one of them at least contains agency. In the big house, another meeting takes place. This one over brandy, not law. Local men talk about discipline, about the need to set examples, about rumors of unrest they insist are exaggerated even as they describe new precautions. They reassure one another with familiar phrases. We're in control. They have to say it out loud now. One of them mentions the preacher again, suggests keeping a closer eye on him. Another waves it off. Too obvious, too devout, too watched already. The system prefers threats it can classify easily. A religious man speaking softly does not fit the profile of immediate danger. So they postpone action. Power often recognizes risk, just late enough to make it worse. Back in the quarters, final preparations happen in ways that resemble ordinary life. Tools checked. Paths walked casually during daylight, memorized at night. Signals confirmed without appearing to communicate. Invisibility is no longer just survival. It is strategy. The preacher walks alone for a time under the cover of darkness, moving between trees that do not question his presence. He is not searching for signs in the sky. He is measuring time, distance, readiness, practical considerations carried inside. A man, others assume, is guided only by vision. Faith and planning are not opposites here. They are layered, each giving the other cover. He pauses at the edge of a field and looks toward the main house, a shape against the faint starlight. He does not see luxury. He sees vulnerability disguised as confidence. Doors that open inward, windows placed for breeze, not defense. A household that believes danger approaches from outside, not from within its own enforced silence. Recognition sharpens, not softens, his resolve. He knows there will be no cavalry, no last-minute intervention, no authority stepping in to mediate or rescue. The law is not a neutral referee. It is an extension of the structure they are about to challenge. Once they move, they will be alone. This understanding does not paralyze him. It steadies him, because false hope is more dangerous than fear. It encourages hesitation at the moment. When hesitation is fatal, better to walk forward with clear sight. Around him, others make the same internal adjustment, accepting that there will be no protection beyond what they create for one another, no guarantee beyond the decision itself. This is what the system never imagines. That people it has reduced to dependence can act without expecting mercy. Near midnight, a final, quiet exchange takes place between two men who have worked side by side for years. They do not speak about what will happen. They speak about families, about small memories, about things that deserve to be remembered in case remembering becomes someone else's job. It is not a goodbye, it is an acknowledgement of risk without sentiment. In the distance, a patrol passes along the main road, lanterns swinging hooves dull against packed dirt. The rider scans the darkness for movement that looks wrong. Everything looks as it should. Cabins quiet, fields empty, trees still. He moves on behind him. In the space he just declared safe by his inattention, decisions settle into action. The system has been recognized for what it is, not invincible, not moral, not permanent, just powerful, and afraid of losing that power. And now, for the first time, the fear is about to have a shape it cannot legislate away. There is a moment, before any irreversible act, when people become something other than what the world has called them. It is not visible from a distance. From the outside, the night looks unchanged, the same tree line, the same scattered buildings, the same sky stretched wide and indifferent overhead. But within that stillness, roles are shifting, not loudly, not ceremonially, quietly, like breath slowing before a plunge underwater. The system has always relied on visibility, on knowing where everyone is supposed to be. At this hour, in this place, doing this task, predictability is its comfort. Patterns are its map of control. Tonight, the patterns remain, and that is why they work. The men moving through the dark do not run. They do not gather in dramatic clusters. They follow routes their bodies have walked 1,000 times before, to barns, to sheds, to paths between fields. Familiar movement draws no attention, even from watchful eyes. Invisibility, perfected through years of surveillance, now becomes a form of fluency. A man crossing a yard with a tool in hand looks like someone finishing a late chore. A figure slipping between trees resembles a worker seeking privacy before sleep. A door, opening slowly in the night, can still be explained as heat, restlessness, habit. Each motion is ordinary. Together, they form something the system has never learned how to read. Coordination without signal. Inside one cabin, a young man sits with his back to the wall, eyes closed, breathing steady. He is not praying, he is rehearsing. The path from door to tree line. The number of steps before the ground dips. The place where roots break the surface. He has walked it so often in daylight that his feet now remember it in darkness. Fear is present, but contained, not denied. Measured, he has seen punishment. He knows what capture means. His calm is not innocence, it is decision settled past. Argument. Across the yard, an older man ties a strip of cloth around his wrist. Not for protection, for recognition by touch in low light. In a world where names can be dangerous to speak, texture becomes identification. These preparations are small, personal, nearly invisible. That is their strength. The preacher moves among them without announcing himself, a hand on a shoulder, a brief look held a second longer than usual. No speeches, no rallying words. He knows that emotion, if stirred too loudly, can spill into panic. What they need is not fire, it is clarity. He has spent years learning how to speak in ways that pass through ears without alerting suspicion. Now he uses the same restraint to hold the group steady. His presence does not excite, it centers. Authority here does not come from volume. It comes from trust, accumulated in silence. Further off, at another plantation, a similar stillness hums beneath the surface of routine. Word has traveled in fragments, over time, never in ways that could be traced. A glance held, a phrase repeated with slight emphasis, a shared understanding that the night to act would not be announced, it would be recognized. That recognition is happening now, in multiple places, at once. The system, built on isolation, has accidentally synchronized the people it meant to divide. Similar conditions produce similar conclusions. In the main house, on the hill, a lamp still burns in an upstairs window. Someone restless, someone reading, someone convinced that danger always approaches from a distance, with warning. Below, the yard remains undisturbed. A dog lifts its head as a shape passes near the porch. It inhales, searching for unfamiliar scent. The smell is known. The body language, familiar. The dog lowers its head again. Even loyalty can be guided by routine. A group pauses in the shadow of a barn. No one speaks. They wait for a sound not made by them, a distant call, an agreed-upon signal disguised as something natural. An owl's cry, repeated in a pattern too deliberate to be random. It comes, soft, twice, then silence. Movement resumes. The transformation is not into soldiers. There are no uniforms, no drilled formations, no shouted commands. It is into something harder for the system to categorize. People acting with shared intention after lifetimes of enforced passivity. They have not been trained in warfare. They have been trained in observation, endurance, adaptation. Those skills now overlap in a new shape. A man approaches a door he has repaired many times before. He knows the hinge that sticks, the board that creaks, the place to put pressure so the sound travels into the wood instead of the air. His knowledge was once used to maintain the household's comfort. Tonight, it serves a different purpose. This is the deepest irony. Every act of control has taught the controlled how the system functions, how it sleeps, how it relaxes, where it assumes safety. Knowledge given carelessly through domination becomes a map in other hands. Inside, a woman wakes to a sound that does not fit her understanding of night. Not loud, just wrong. She sits up, listening. Her mind reaches for explanations that preserve normalcy: wind, an animal, a loose shutter. The human instinct is to delay fear. That delay is part of the opening. Across the property, similar scenes unfold with slight variations. Surprise does not always come as a shout. Sometimes it is the quiet presence of people where they have never been allowed to stand. The goal is not spectacle. It is disruption of certainty. Men who believed themselves secure now find the ground of that belief shifting. Not through speeches or declarations, but through the sudden collapse of assumptions they did not know they were standing on in the darkness. Those who have always been seen only as labor now move with purpose that cannot be reduced to task. Their bodies carry years of discipline: how to work through pain, how to stay focused under watch, how to continue despite exhaustion. That discipline now serves their own decision. Fear travels quickly through the main house once the first signs become undeniable. Confusion first, then alarm. Orders given without full understanding of what is happening or where. Power, when surprised, often sounds like disbelief. This can't be happening, but it is, and the people moving through the night are not transformed into symbols or legends in this moment. They remain what they have always been: fathers, sons, brothers. Men who have known constraint so long that motion now feels both foreign and necessary. Their strength is not rage alone. It is coordination born from years of being forced to move carefully. At one point, two men cross paths unexpectedly in the dark. For a fraction of a second, tension spikes, friend or threat. Then recognition settles, a nod. No words. They continue in different directions, parts of a design too large for any single person to see fully. This is how invisibility becomes a weapon. Not through disappearance, but through misinterpretation. Through being present so long as background that movement goes unread until it is too late. The preacher finds himself briefly alone between two houses. The night air, loud in his ears, he feels the weight of what has been set in motion. Not triumph, not doubts, something steadier. A recognition that history rarely shifts without cost. And that cost has always been paid by the same people, whether they act or endure. At least, now, the payment has purpose chosen, not imposed. A lantern flares in an upstairs window. A voice calls out, sharp with fear. Another answers from a distance. The illusion of seamless control fractures into scattered reactions. The system is awake now. But waking is not the same as regaining control. In the fields beyond, figures move along rows that have defined their days for years. Plants brush against their legs as they pass, witnesses rooted in place. The land does not change sides. It simply absorbs what happens upon it. By the time riders are mounted and shots fired into the air in panicked warning, the night has already done its work. Not in conquering territory, but in shattering certainty. Those who were meant to be invisible have acted without asking to be seen. And that is what terrifies power most. Not open rebellion alone, but the realization that obedience was never the same as acceptance, and silence was never the same as consent. As the eastern sky begins the faintest shift toward gray, the transformation is complete, not into victors, into people who have stepped beyond the role assigned to them, knowing there will be no safe return. The system will respond with overwhelming force. It always does, but it will do so from a place it has never occupied before. Fear, because, for one long night, control slipped, not to an army, not to a foreign power, but to those it had trained itself not to see. Dawn arrives slowly, not with announcement, not with ceremony, just light spilling over the horizon, brushing fields, fences, and houses with the same indifferent hand it always does. The world looks unchanged. The crops sway in the breeze. Smoke rises from chimneys. Doors open. Children cry. Animals stir. All seems familiar. And yet, nothing is the same. Inside the main house, men wake to disarray. Windows shuttered from within. Furniture shifted. Doors unlocked, then locked again in patterns they do not understand. Footsteps traced and in ways impossible to track. For hours, confusion and fear mingle. Orders are shouted. Lanterns flicker. Panic seeps slowly into the rooms that had believed themselves fortified by law, by locks, by sheer assumption. Outside, the people who moved under the cover of darkness vanish almost as quietly as they appeared. No parades, no flags, no triumphant cries, just the echo of steps fading across the earth. Their presence remains in the disruption, not in the bodies that can be counted or catalogued. The law moves next. It will always move next. New regulations are drafted before midday. Laws banning nighttime gatherings, stricter curfews, education restricted, travel limited, anything that might allow people to remember, to communicate, to act collectively in ways the system cannot anticipate. Fear is written into paper and ink, enforced through the language of legitimacy. Yet, no law can fully erase what has already occurred. No ledger can account for the knowledge carried silently in bodies. The system can punish, can terrorize, can enforce absence, but it cannot reclaim memory from those who have lived it, and history, as it often does, begins its work. Stories are reshaped, events reduced, names withheld, accounts sanitized to fit comfort rather than truth. What was once terrifying becomes suppressed uprising. Individuals vanish into footnotes. The system writes itself into permanence, leaving gaps where resistance existed. The invisible people are reduced again to scenery. The threat they posed, softened, almost erased. Some remember in fragments. A family recalls the shapes that moved in the night. A child recalls a voice that carried urgency, but no promise. A man recalls the smell of fire and sweat and earth as he navigated the darkness without permission, without guidance, without assurance. These memories circulate quietly, privately, never to reach the pages deemed official. Irony thickens. The same system that feared exposure now cements invisibility. The rebellion, or whatever name will be used, will haunt legislative halls without appearing in them. Laws drafted to prevent recurrence inadvertently mark recognition of what, precisely, authorities could not see coming. A fear codified as control, a memory erased by the very system that survived its shaking. For the participants, victory exists only in what cannot be measured. Control disrupted, assumptions shattered, the predictable world unsettled. Yet there is no fanfare, no acknowledgement, no history books to validate the lived reality. Their achievement exists in the faintest margins. in the way a field remembers footprints, or a tree bends differently after pressure applied unseen. The preacher, whose name may never appear in any official account, walks among them one last time, guiding silently, observing, affirming in small gestures that the night has changed the landscape of perception, not with triumph, not with celebration, but with a quiet, almost imperceptible shift. As the sun climbs higher, authorities patrol again. They assess, they adjust, they tighten. Yet the night's work cannot be undone. The system's fear persists. Though masked behind law and enforcement, it will seek stability through ever harsher measures, through surveillance, through punishment. But the pattern has been broken. Once and irreversibly. The people who acted will be forced back into the roles the world assigns: laborers, property, background. They will walk daily routines as before. They will smile when required, speak only when necessary, avoid eyes that might notice. Invisibility becomes the new armor. What remains unseen is often the most dangerous, and the system never learns this truth fully. Years later, the story will be reduced to footnotes, cautionary tales, or a single name spoken in passing, if spoken at all. Children will grow up learning simplified narratives. Legislators will cite law, not disruption. Society will believe the world was always safe, orderly, and obedient. The disruption, though, persists in shadows, in memory, in silence. Victory without recognition, resistance without remembrance. The night leaves its mark in ways that cannot be catalogued, controlled, or celebrated. It exists only in absence, in the quiet knowledge of those who endured, those who moved, those who watched and acted. And so history forgets. It forgets names, faces, the rhythms of preparation, the intelligence of survival, the quiet coordination that tore a fragile illusion of control apart. Forgetting is its own kind of power, more enduring than law, more effective than punishment. It ensures the world continues as though nothing happened, even though the foundation has shifted beneath the feet of those who thought themselves secure. The day resumes. Work begins again. Fields are tended, animals fed, tasks performed as if routine alone defines reality. But the air is slightly different. Subtle tension lingers. A shadow of knowledge passes from one to another in glances too brief to be noticed by those in power. The memory of the night survives in silence. Nothing is written to celebrate it. Nothing is inscribed to commemorate it. Yet, through absence, through erasure, through invisibility, it remains alive. The system responds, enforces, punishes, but it will never reclaim certainty, because the truth, inconvenient, unrecorded, invisible, moves in quiet, untraceable ways. And so it is, and so it always will be. Victory without memory. The system survived, but it learned, however unknowingly, that control can never be complete, and the people it sought to erase, they live on, unseen, uncounted, and unforgettable, only to those who remember. Silence falls again. Not the comforting silence of routine, but the heavy, resonant silence of knowing. A silence that carries questions the world will not answer, histories that will not be written, and truths that will remain deliberately invisible. No banners, no speeches, no resolution, only the enduring presence of absence, the quiet indictment of a world that forgets while pretending to remember. The story ends where history leaves it, partially erased, unresolved, and unsettling.